Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to this virtual and in-person service of the Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church on this beautiful spring. Love and justice ever whiter. Welcome to this sacred place. Come, let us worship, celebrate, grieve, and love together. If you are watching online, please sign into the chat box so that we may know who is attending, and it will enable you to send in your joys and concerns. Am I speaking into the microphone? All right. I am Ron Golan, and I will be assisting Reverend Kevin Carson in the service this morning. Jessica Rupers is playing the piano. Marty Carson will be doing the children time, and Vic Allen is our tech person this morning. Announcements. Do we have any announcements this morning?
Ladies group?
Ladies group?
Are we having ladies group?
Yeah, my house is.
Ron is hosting ladies group this Friday.
So Wanda is hosting ladies group this coming Friday. Any other announcements? Please silence your cell phone. I guess that's one important one. If there are no other announcements,
Well, if anyone wants to sign the citizens initiative, I've got forms.
Oh, and I do too.
okay. If anyone has not signed the citizens initiative, see Karen or
Or me, Cindy.
Cindy. So I would guess we've all done that already, but if not.
If not,
Now let us prepare ourselves for worship. Calm your hearts, our minds, our breathing. And I will bring the peace bowl 3 times. church's covenant helps us remember why we are a part of this faith and why we give our time and our resources to this congregation. If you so choose, please recite along with me the covenant that this congregation has chosen to live by. Love is
the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
We will now light the chalice. In the lighting of this chalice, we invoke the spirit of unity and diversity. May its flame remind us that in our differences we find strength, and in our common humanity we find connection. And now it is time for community gathering reading. Morning. It's like 2 years ago.
I'm sorry I didn't get a hold of you Friday. I ended up in the hospital and it just turned into one long. I'm glad you're here. That's important. We were getting a little concerned, but I saw the orders of service and you were around in line. So I'm glad that you're here. Yeah, I did just the next step last week. I brought my whole machine in here so we need to do the video before the that condition. I'm proud of you. So it was all good. Well, you were good. Well, I'm sorry to throw everything into such confusion. Hey, you can't help it. Being ill,
I'm doing all right, Jim. Well, yeah, hanging in there. They finally figured out what was going on. So, yeah, it was actually something that was an issue years ago, and it didn't occur to me that it might flare back up again, but it did. And once figured out what it was pretty easy to treat. Well, yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you might want to look at this. And then they came back and said, oh yeah, you're right, that's what's going on.
Like one of the doctors says, okay, so what's wrong with you?
Yeah. So it's not it's a pain, but it's not a major issue. You know, I should have recognized it earlier what was going on. Oh well.
Well, good morning again. Our call to worship this morning is the poem This Easter Morning by May Sarton. The extreme delicacy of this Easter morning spoke to me as a prayer and as a warning. It was light on the brink, spring light after a rain that gentled my dark night. I walked through landscapes I had never seen, where the fresh grass had just begun to green, and its roots, watered deep, sprung to my tread. The maples wore a cloud of feathery red, but flowering trees still showed their clear design against the pale blue brightness, chilled like wine. And as I was praying all the time, I walked, while starlings flew about and talked and talked. Somewhere and everywhere, life spoke the word. The dead trees woke, each bush held its bird. I prayed for delicate love and difficult, that all be gentle now and know no fault, that all be patient as a wild rabbit fled sudden before me. Dear love, I would have said, and to each bird who flew up from the wood, I would be gentler still if I could. For on this Easter morning it would seem the softest footfall danger is extreme. And so I prayed to be less than the grass, and yet to feel the presence that might pass. I made a prayer, I heard the answer. Wait, when all is so in peril and so delicate. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In.
Okay. Not to worry.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is that better?
Yep.
All right. So today, I don't have a picture book. Today I have a story of Easter eggs. Now, the practice of decorating eggs has existed for thousands of years. In fact, decorated ostrich eggs have been found in Africa, which are 60,000 years old. That's a long time. And in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, decorated eggs were considered symbols of rebirth. The height of the beauty of decorated Easter eggs can be found in many cultures within the Eastern or Greek Orthodox Church. Even the Fabergé eggs they were Easter gifts. One legend from the Greek Orthodox or Eastern tradition involves Mary Magdalene and the origins of the Easter egg. According to the story, after Jesus' resurrection and ascension to heaven, Mary Magdalene, a wealthy woman of some importance, boldly presented herself to the Emperor Tiberius Caesar in Rome to tell him about Jesus. She had an egg in her hand to illustrate her message. She held that egg out to him and exclaimed for the very first time, "Christ is risen." The emperor mocked her. He said Jesus had no more risen than that egg in her hand was red. Immediately, the egg miraculously turned red. Well, the emperor then heeded her complaints about the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, for condemning an innocent man, and he had Pilate removed from Jerusalem. In another legend, it is said that Mary Magdalene brought a basket of white-boiled eggs with her on Easter morning to the tomb of Jesus. When she arrived at the site of the tomb, she found the stone already rolled away, and the eggs in her basket had turned into bright shades of color. Now, these are only two stories that explain the tradition of handing out red Easter eggs at Easter among Christians in the earliest days. And this is still the practice in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Mary Magdalene is often depicted in Eastern icons holding a red egg. I happen to have a copy of an icon right here. You can see she's got a egg in her hand. Yeah, she's pointing to it. And other icons of Mary Magdalene, she's holding a vial of perfume, sometimes a vial of perfume, and an egg. It's all associated with the stories about her. I also have some red eggs. I don't know if you can see in the basket, but I have red eggs. You're going to have a red egg by the end of the day. I've got one or two in here just for you, Ariella. Okay. Now, my red eggs are not as fancy as some, and not as deep as red as others, but I did use a traditional red organic dye that you can buy from Greece, or generally at Greek Orthodox churches. So it's beet juice is the secret ingredient, beet juice. And I will have this basket and the icon at the checkered cloth table, and during coffee hour, I'm going to make sure Ariella gets one, and then the other 11 are up for grabs. So please, take an egg home with you. And we're going to sing Ariella upstairs, where I have another story about Easter eggs.
As we leave this friendly place, Lord, to every face, may the kindness which we learn guide our hearts till we return.
It is now time for Joy's. It is now time for Joy's and concerns. And Reverend Kevin has the first one. We will light a candle.
Please adjust the microphone. Yeah, it's a little long distance.
I want to light the first candle this morning to commemorate the Transgender Day of Visibility, which is today, and to express my concern about the hateful legislation that is just permeating America right now, and especially in Idaho. So this first candle is a candle of joy and concern.
The first joy from Siren. Edert and I have gotten engaged. As well as that, we have recently found out that we are expecting. Victoria, a joy. We have 5 visitors today. Gabe and Mason from Idaho Falls. Hillary, Kara, and Derek from Driggs. Welcome, welcome. And Anonymous, a joy. It is always a joy when people stay after supper to help clean up. Thanks to all of you from the care team. From Bob and Roby, a sorrow. Bob and I are praying for all of the people of Gaza, as are we all. From Victoria, a joy. My daffodils want to bloom, but it's too cold. Except for one that is on the left of the glass table. Thank you. And from Mason Maynard, a joy. Finally got a full-time firefighter job and graduated from Fire Academy. That's wonderful. And from Cindy, a joy. Thank you for the hugely successful soup supper last Friday night to our UUCIF care team. Please consider helping them out. And we will light one additional candle for all those joys or concerns or sorrows that we hold in our hearts.
Our reading this morning is something I adapted about the pagan roots of Easter, and most of the material comes from the History Channel's UK website. Easter is a Christian festival celebrated across the world, commemorating the resurrection of Jesus Christ after his crucifixion. How then have bunnies, buns, and eggs come to be associated with this religious event? The answer lies in pre-Christianity, with many of the themes of Easter rooted in pagan traditions. Easter falls at the time of year known as the spring equinox, when the length of the nights in the northern hemisphere become identical to the length of the days. Spring, as a time of renewal and rebirth, has been celebrated for thousands of years from distant cultures past. The pre-Christian ancient world is filled with stories of resurrection around spring. One of the world's oldest civilizations, the Sumer, who lived in southern Mesopotamia, now southern modern Iraq, inscribed a story of their goddess Inanna into a clay tablet some 2,000 years before Christ. The story goes that Inanna descended into the underworld to find her recently deceased husband. There she was killed before being brought back to life by other gods. She was permitted to return to the world as the sun for 6 months before having to descend into the underworld once again during the winter for a further 6 months. It is perhaps the first ancient story of resurrection and rebirth centered on spring. There were many more stories amongst the ancient civilizations that followed a similar theme, including the resurrection of Horus, the falcon-headed god of ancient Egypt, and the death and rebirth of the Greek god Dionysus. They are stories that share ideologies about renewal and light conquering darkness. As Christianity began to sweep across Europe, many pagan festivals and traditions were absorbed and adapted into the Christian faith. It made sense that the already ingrained concept of new life being celebrated during springtime should become associated with Jesus conquering death and being reborn. If you notice, the date of Easter changes every year. And this is because it is governed by the phases of the moon and not a specific date on which Christ was said to have been risen from the dead. It falls on the Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox, making it a celebration of the seasons, a concept rooted in paganism. It is believed that in most European countries, the name for Easter came from the Hebrew word Pesach, otherwise known as Passover, the Jewish springtime holiday. It is called Pâques in French, for example, and Pasqua in Italian. However, in English-speaking countries and Germany, the word derives from a pagan springtime goddess called Eoster, who is documented by an Anglo-Saxon monk who wrote during the 8th century. Eoster was a goddess celebrated with a festival during the spring equinox, and according to some scholars, her association with hares is the origin of the Easter Bunny story. Although this is still hotly debated. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. Well, human beings have celebrated the time around the spring equinox for a very long time. And as cultures evolved and new religious ideas emerged, there has been a continuous transformation in the way we name and celebrate this time of year. But if we look at the essence of these religious holidays across cultures and time, there are common themes of balance, renewal, and rebirth. Spring is a season of transition. In the northern hemisphere, this is the time of year when the earth reawakens from the cold of winter and new life begins to emerge from the thawing soil. And in the southern hemisphere, of course, the seasons are reversed, and spring comes during our fall, but it still comes. Though we could see wintry weather around here for at least a few more weeks, there are already buds forming on trees and other signs that spring is coming. Animals crawl out of hibernation and birds reappear, soon building their nests and hatching their offspring. I heard the other day that the first grizzly bear of the season has been spotted in Grand Teton National Park, right on schedule. Across the land, a succession of wildflowers will start to color the landscape, and the blessed greenness of the land returns. If you survive the winter, it is a time to rejoice. And in the higher latitudes, where the seasons are more distinct, this is especially the case. When I'm greeted by a cool spring morning after the world really begins to green up, and there's a brilliant blue sky overhead, I'm often reminded of the feelings expressed by the ancient author of Psalm 118, who wrote, "This is a day the Lord has made, we will rejoice and be glad in it." It also brings to mind memories of some of my favorite camping trips, especially in the southern Appalachians, where the variety of early spring wildflowers is spectacular. I think about crawling out of my tent and firing up the stove to boil water for coffee, listening to the bird song greeting the day, and feeling the warmth of the sun as it begins to bake off the morning dew. And all around me on the forest floor are spring beauties, bloodroots, blue anemones, and bluets, the first waves of wildflowers blooming among the emerging ferns and other vascular flora. How could I not feel a sacredness in such a time and place? Over 900 years ago, the medieval German mystic Hildegard of Bingen coined the term viriditas, meaning greening power, to describe her sense of a sacred creativity infused into the world. And I think this is the spiritual feeling I'm trying to convey. Using the Christian metaphor with which she was familiar, she described it as the Word is living, being, spirit, all verdant greening, all creativity. This Word manifests itself in every creature. I suggest that if you substituted the Tao for the Word in these two sentences, it would sound like something straight out of a sacred Taoist text. And you could do the same with several other religious traditions. There are common spiritual feelings that well up in us when we see the greenness return to the earth. And there are obvious metaphors in nature to express our spirituality. Some of the holidays at this time of year emphasize the need for regaining balance in our lives. As its name indicates, the spring equinox is one of the two times during the Earth's annual revolution around the sun when the length of day and night are equal. Light and dark are in balance, once again, after the long, dark nights of winter. And it is time to rebalance the stress of our minds, bodies, and spirits. For Muslims, this is the whole month of Ramadan, which occurs in the 9th month of their lunar calendar, and it varies from year to year around the equinox. According to tradition, Ramadan is the month in which the first verses of the Quran were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Balance is emphasized by eating a meal before and after sunlight hours and fasting during the day. Fasting is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, the fundamental religious practices of the faith. Traditionally, Christians too fasted intermittently as a practice of penance during the Lenten season, the 40 days that begin with Ash Wednesday and end on Easter. However, it is more common these days for those who observe Lent to give up something like chocolate or alcohol during this period rather than real fasting. For many pagans, the celebration of the spring solar holiday is known as Ostara, named after the pagan springtime goddess, Ostara, mentioned in our reading. The symbols associated with Ostara in various pagan cultures have long been spring flowers, fairies, butterflies, rabbits, and eggs. And many contemporary pagans have reimagined rituals that incorporate these symbols to celebrate the holiday. One neo-pagan website I ran across suggested that a good practice for rebalancing ourselves in the spirit of Ostara is to take a break from your ordinary daily routine and take a walk in nature, really focusing on the beauty of the plants and animals you encounter, and sometimes focusing on your own breath. I think this would be a good spiritual practice for all seasons, no matter what spiritual path you may follow. But the transitional times of the fall and the spring equinox are equally, or especially, inviting. The themes of renewal and rebirth are closely related, and I have already spoken about the obvious natural metaphor of life returning to the land after the fallow season of winter. One of my favorite holidays associated with the theme of renewal is the Hindu festival of colors known as Holi, which was celebrated on March 25th this year. Holi is a very popular holiday celebrated in India and Nepal and by the Hindu diaspora worldwide. When I worked with a number of Indian consultants in my IT career, they would often share the holiday with their American coworkers by decorating our offices with bright colors and bringing festive traditional foods to share. Holi is a celebration of the return of spring colors, love, and the triumph of light over darkness. The love aspect is associated with the Hindu deities Radha and Krishna, and the triumph of good over evil, light over dark, is associated with the legendary victory of the god Vishnu over Hiranyakashipu. A big part of the Holi festival involves smearing bright colors or throwing colored powder on family and friends, along with prayers of thanksgiving. I have never been drenched with colors during Holi, but it looks like a lot of fun and joyful mayhem. We Americans could probably use more of that to ease the tensions in our society. Easter is, of course, the spring holiday that most Americans are more familiar with. And as a celebration of the resurrection of Jesus, considered to be the most important event in the Christian tradition, it is clearly aligned with the themes of renewal and rebirth. And as our reading described, the resurrection story of Jesus is not unique in the religious ideas that emerged among the peoples of the ancient Near East and Mediterranean region. It is easy to see why anyone who is skeptical of the resurrection event as being historically true can see parallels in the stories that could have influenced the gospel accounts, which were written many decades after the crucifixion. Most Unitarian Universalists these days are skeptical of the truth claims of Easter about the physical resurrection and the ascension of Jesus after his death. It goes against reason, requires belief in the supernatural intervention of God, and reflects a three-tiered model of the universe with heaven above and earth below. Nor must most of us believe the Jewish Passover story, also celebrated around this time, to be real in the historical sense for similar reasons. But as metaphors for the renewal of life and deliverance from oppression, these are great stories that contain their own degree of truth about the human condition. Easter can be a difficult and confusing holiday for Unitarian Universalists, even though so many of us grew up in some flavor of Christian denomination and may have very fond memories of Easter's past. Memories of little boys in new suits, little girls in colorful dresses and possibly Easter bonnets, Easter egg hunts, and treats from the famous Easter Bunny. I never really cared for marshmallow peeps, but I loved playing with those plastic eggs that come apart in the middle, especially if they were filled with jelly beans. And for those of us who are old enough to remember, there were the infamous baby chicks and ducks for sale in some stores, though thankfully that is largely frowned upon these days. It is obvious that most of these familiar symbols of Easter have deep pagan roots and nothing to do with the Christian story of the resurrection of Jesus. They have, however, been adopted and reimagined to have symbolic meaning with the Easter story, as you heard in our Time for All Ages. When we acknowledge this cumulative tradition that has embraced these earlier symbols of balance, renewal, and rebirth, we can reclaim the Easter holiday as part of an ancient lineage. Another possible way to reclaim the Easter story as Unitarian Universalists is to look at the story through the lens of modern biblical scholarship, and as a story that offers metaphorical truths about rebirth and transformation. Some scholars even suggest that St. Paul and the early followers of Jesus never imagined the Easter story as literal the way we assume they did, and that the traditional interpretation of the Easter story has missed the point. One example comes from John Dominic Crossan in his book Resurrecting Easter, How the West Lost and the East Kept the Original Easter Vision, which is co-authored by his wife Sarah, whose photography is featured. I have a copy of the book with me, which I'll share during the coffee hour. Over a 15-year period, traveling through Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, the Crossans began to notice something striking in the iconography of the resurrection through the centuries in the art of Eastern Christian artists as compared with their Western counterparts. In the Eastern Church, the resurrection was typically depicted in icons as a communal event, with Jesus rising from the tomb and reaching out to grip the hands of Adam and Eve or other saints and biblical figures. You do not see a focus on the empty tomb. Rather, the icons portrayed the idea that Jesus being raised was extended to others. As they dug into the theological implications of this artistic difference, it pointed to the Eastern vision of the resurrection as a universal human event. We're all metaphorically raised, according to this thinking, from death by the transformative message of Jesus and the way he freely poured out his life in love. Crossan also points out that Judaism has no concept of individual resurrection, only communal, though there were Jewish stories of individual ascension, such as that of Elijah, described in 2 Kings. Since Christianity emerged from Jewish roots, it would not be surprising that the early Christians would have similar beliefs about resurrection. Indeed, it appears that for the first 1,000 years or so of Christianity, this vision of the universality of the resurrection event was shared by both the Eastern and Western Church. But then the theology of the West became more individualistic, and the emphasis shifted to professing belief in the empty tomb and Jesus' unique resurrection from the dead. The story of the empty tomb was there from the early days in the Gospels, of course, but Crossan suggests the spiritual transcendence of death and the visions of the risen Jesus, witnessed by Mary Magdalene, the disciples, and later Paul, was what mattered most. It was a transformative event that again celebrates the themes of renewal and rebirth. Another good example of modern scholarship is found in one of the late John Spong's last books, titled Unbelievable: Why Neither Ancient Creeds Nor the Reformation Can Produce a Living Faith Today. Written in his 80s, the former Episcopal bishop was no stranger to controversy for many decades, promoting liberal theological positions that many Orthodox believers find heretical. Sometimes he was even accused of being a Unitarian, but he insisted he wanted to transform his own Episcopal tradition from within. When it came to the resurrection, he wrote, "Resurrection, I now believe, was not a physical act. No formerly deceased body ever walked out of any tomb, leaving it empty to take up a previous life in the world. For Paul and for early Christians to whom Paul says Jesus appeared, resurrection was rather a moment of new revelation that occurred when survival-driven humanity could transcend that limit and give itself away in love to others, including even to those who wish and do us evil." So again, we see this idea of resurrection as transformative, pointing the way for humanity to transcend the limits of accepted social norms. Spong is even more explicit in seeing it as something revelatory and ongoing. He especially emphasized the teachings of Paul on the subject, whose authentic letters are considered some of the earliest Christian writings. Paul proclaimed that Jesus was raised up, but he never mentioned the empty tomb or other aspects of the Easter story. Spong concluded that Paul never imagined a bodily resurrection of Jesus, but rather a spiritual transformation that was accessible to us all. There are so many religious holidays in the spring to choose from, depending on where you are in your spiritual journey. And maybe you want to embrace aspects from more than one in your own celebration of balance, renewal, and rebirth. If so, you are following a long tradition of adapting symbols, ideas, and practices from earlier times into something new and unique. Maybe someday a distinctly Unitarian Universalist spring holiday will emerge, but with our spiritual diversity and emphasis on inclusion, I'm not sure how that would happen. We have developed common symbols and rituals like lighting our chalice, but so far no special UU holiday exists. The historic examples that I mentioned all emerged within religions with a more defined set of beliefs and teachings. So for now, let us celebrate the equinox, Ostara, Easter, Ramadan, Passover, Holy, or whatever holiday lifts your spirits as the glorious rebirth of the earth begins. This is a time to rebalance our overstressed lives, to renew our spirits, and to immerse ourselves within the annual cycle of rebirth that bears witness to our place within the interdependent web of all existence. May you have a blessed spring season. I invite you to rise and body your spirit once again and join in singing our closing hymn, number 270, O Day of Light and Gladness. closing words are the poem Landscape by Mary Oliver. Isn't it plain the sheets of moss, except they have no tongues, could lecture all day if they wanted about spiritual patience? Isn't it clear the black oaks along the path are standing as though they were the most fragile of flowers? Every morning I walk like this around the pond, thinking if the doors of my heart ever close, I'm as good as dead. Every morning so far I'm alive. And now the crows break off from the rest of darkness and burst up into the sky as though all night they had thought about what they would be like, what they would like their lives to be, and imagined their strong, thick wings.
Please join with me in reading the words for extinguishing the torch. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These things build our hearts until we are together again.